All right, it's 4:30. We'll call this meeting of Kerrville City Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Item 1A on the agenda. Oh, I'm sorry, before we get to that, Dorothy, would you mind taking roll, please?
Yes, sir. Garrett Harmon,
Here.
Rustin Zuber,
Here.
Trisha Byram,
Here.
David Jones,
Here.
David Lipscomb,
Here.
Cliff Tuttle,
Here.
Hunter Patterson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. All right, now, item 1A on the agenda, approval of minutes from the February 6th meeting. Commissioners, do you have any questions or corrections?
Make a motion to approve as presented.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. All right. Item 2A is a public hearing and action on a zoning change. Drew?
Thank you, sir. I do apologize to the public. They're going a little low tech today. We do have one screen over here if you need to move around in the room to see. This is public hearing, consideration and action to recommend an ordinance to change the zoning from R1 single family residential to R3 Multifamily Residential District, which includes a proposed amendment to the future land use plan of the city's comprehensive plan on approximately 3.88 acres out of the hand survey number 115, abstract A0193, generally located at West Loop 534, north of Paragon Place. And with that, I'll turn it over to the applicant to give his presentation.
That one goes back and forth. I'm going to just read off what I've got up there. Hopefully everyone can see it.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll try to.
I do have a hearing loss. I'm sorry.
Yes. Would that be okay if I face this way and I'll read off my phone? Yes. Okay, so the severe topography of the
Sorry.
property.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. I'm Michael Bates. This is my grandfather's property. I'm representing him. He lives in Colorado, but he's the developer of the property and the owner. And I'm 29 years old. Sorry. Okay, so Stone River's property, it's 3.88 acres. The severe topography of the property calls for more dense development. The steep angles of the land demand that the development be focused more vertically in condo apartment style so as to economically benefit both the developer and the city on a property which otherwise would sit with not much use to anybody except as a mere undeveloped hillside. The property has a unique set of natural and man-made buffers which help the future developments on the property avoid offense to the surrounding area.
Can't see. I need to see the picture.
Oh,
Just can't see.
sure. To the west is a beautiful view of the golf course and cityscape that goes down towards Sydney Baker. Very much a view which we should capitalize on with appropriate development. That's standing at the top of the hill, looking westward, very close to the loop at the top of the hill. On the south end of the property is the power line easement buffer, which is expressed below with an orange tint. This buffer already gives that minimum 80 feet of distance between the nearest residence to the south, even before the setback regulations. To the north of the property comes to a sharp point, which directly is not connected to any other private resident lots, but instead to the highway easement of Loop 534 and the golf course. However, just further up north, about 250 feet, there are several undeveloped R3 properties as well. Our property outlined in red next to the golf course, and the other R3 properties are outlined in black with an orange tint over them. In the following, I show several 3D renderings which give a visual representation of how severe the topography on the property is. This model is taken from 4-foot topography lines on a map and pulled up to the appropriate levels to give a general representation of the land shape. You can see how extreme of a hillside we're dealing with. There's a few more. This is looking southward on the north end of the property, and this one is similar, looking the other way, south, looking northward. Oh, I'm sorry. That is, the first picture is on the north end, looking southward, and the bottom picture is where you would be sitting on the golf course looking northward. And our property is highlighted in blue. The owner, my grandfather, foresees several mid-rise buildings, roughly 40 feet by 60 foot footprints, with around 5 to 7 stories, whatever the zoning code would allow for. In the 3D render below, the 60-foot tall building are still well below the hillside high point of the property, and it does not obstruct sight lines when at the top of the hill or on the highway. And here's another image looking more from the golf course side.
So what's on the other side of that hill?
That's the highway loop.
The other side of the hill?
Oh, the other side is another steep hill that goes up towards, I believe there's a church even further up, and there's some.
Okay, that's on the other side of the street. The church is on the other side of the street.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what's on the other side of that hill behind the buildings?
Oh, that's just the highway easement. Yes, here, I believe if I go back just a little bit, yes, sorry. So the north end is at the top, and the highway comes down, and if you see that little sharp point, it would be right up there in the top left corner. That's all just highway easement right behind us. There's no private residence there.
Of course.
That's the golf course on the backside, right?
Yes, the golf
You'd be
course
looking
is
at the
on
golf course.
bottom side over here. That would be a little pond right there at the little half circle, and then this is all golf course on the more flat side of us. This is a simple example idea of the development the owner envisions. The size of the buildings and the number of them may vary depending on compliance with the city's codes and with regards to the issues with cutting and filling the land. Large cuts and retaining walls will almost certainly be the deciding factors of the placement and quantity of the buildings in this proposed development. So that is what my grandfather envisions he will be able to do with, if he's able to form the land appropriately. Otherwise, there's not much else that he sees that could go there. In summary, with the nearby R3 zone properties to the north, the buffers surrounding the property on the south, east, and west, the golf course, the highway, and the power line easement, and the severe topography, we feel that the higher density zoning of R3 is appropriate and justified. Thank you.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yes, sir.
The power lines, are you doing everything between the power lines and the loop? Or are you coming downhill from up?
No, that little pie shape on the other side of the power line is completely going to be undeveloped, and it's too severe topography for us to do anything, as well as too small with the setback regulations on the power line. So that little piece that's on the southern side of the power line easement is going to be undisturbed whatsoever. Everything will be on the north end of the power line.
So, okay.
Yes.
Is this the appropriate time to ask questions?
Not yet.
Go ahead and save questions for the public hearing.
Okay, good.
All right, thank you.
And for the board members in your packet, look at the future land use plan going forward from there. The property is designated neighborhood residential in the future land use plan. Neighborhood residential is a common place type that is predominantly single family with detached lots. Home sites are located within platted subdivisions and on residential streets with sidewalks. This place type is serviced by at least one provider for every utility. Units are typically larger than those in the preservation residential place type, and limited amounts of local retail services may be appropriate. The existing area does include single-family homes, of course, the golf course and the Loop 534. This request is also an amendment to the future land use plan. The zoning request is consistent with both the transitional residential, with the transitional residential place type, which supports a variety of housing type and a very compact network, complete walkable streets, navigated by car, bike, or on foot. Housing types could be small lots, single-family homes, patio homes, duplexes, condominiums, or apartments. Limited amounts of local retail and services may be appropriate within certain areas. And here's going to the zoning map. As you can see, this is zoned R1. The neighborhood to the south is zoned R1. Across the loop is zoned R1 where the church is. And then, of course, the golf course is zoned public and institutional. The Kerrville 2050 plan is considered to be a living document and thus intended to be reviewed and updated from time to time. This includes both regular reviews on a regular basis every 5 to 10 years, or as needed in cases such as this. When looking at a zoning a change to the future land use plan with a zone change, one of the key factors that we look at is if the application represents a new and important opportunity that the community deserves due consideration that was not known or anticipated at the time of adoption of the plan. This property being vacant land, we didn't have any proposals before us when we were developing the comprehensive plan in 2017 and 2018. So it would be a new consideration for the board's review. We'll look at the land use plan, land use table. You can see the different mix of uses from R1 single family to R3 multifamily. Obviously picking up apartments, condos, and some of the different levels of assisted living. It would still be a multifamily environment. With access from Loop 534, there should be minimal impact on the thoroughfare system. Traffic would be determined on the final design of the project, again, depending upon the total unit count and the access that they require from TxDOT on Loop 534. Same with parking, that'll be determined through the permitting process at the time of the project. Based on the location of the parcel adjacent to Loop 534 and the golf course, the transitional residential place type is fitting and similar to other properties fronting the loop.
Did you say all access would be from Loop 534? Would be limited from?
That's what they've proposed at this point. There would not necessarily be a limitation. They do have frontage at that cul-de-sac, very narrow frontage, but it would be, based on the topography, I think it would be difficult to gain any access back there. With the transitional residential place type, R3 multifamily zoning is appropriate and dependent upon the consideration of the amendment to the future land use plan. And based on the policies within the comprehensive plan, staff recommends the case for your approval. I'd be pleased to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
Commissioners, any questions before we open the public hearing? No? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so at 4:43, open the public hearing. If you would like to speak, please step to the podium, state your name and address. I don't have any speaker request forms, so it's just going to be kind of a first come, first serve. Oh, there you go. Please state your name and address for the record.
Yes. My name is Blair Murray. I reside at 1712 Quinlan Creek Drive. And you asked about what was on the other side. That would be my house on the other side of that proposed 5 or 6 story or 7 story building. My neighbors are all here. We're kind of all together and we come together at the cul-de-sac. My question is, did a good job about talking about topography. That was one of my questions because LCRA about 16 years ago did a clearing of some of the property at the top of the hill, and which resulted in a flood that caused my retaining wall to have to be replaced by LCRA, as well as flooding in the interior of my house and my neighbor's house. So since nothing's really going to happen up top, I'm not going to really say anything about that. I guess the main thing is the change of the it's going to change the value of my home, of my property, which I've invested, and we all have invested in our neighborhood a lot of our money. And apartments, basically, our privacy, our feeling of safety is going to be greatly affected because we do not know who will come across our property at what time of night, or we just don't know what's there. We don't know what's going to be available. We don't know if there's going to be commercial development. I know there's a proposal for the condos, which I understand, and I totally understand that, but the height is a big concern. And anyway, that is my concern, and this is why I vote no, and I'll move on to somebody else.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Is there anybody here from LCRA? No? Okay, I live at 1302 Paragon Place, and Blair referenced to a flood that we had in 2004. LCRA took down some silk cloths that were up there for God knows how long. They took it down. 2 days later, we had our 100-year rainstorm, and we all had Niagara Falls in our backyard. LCRA came in promptly, and they built cages of stone wall across the back of my house adjacent to me, and halfway to Blair's. And after Blair's, then they built a dirt channel for the water to go, and they built a catch basin for that water. And I know that you mentioned that there is access from the cul-de-sac to that property. And if that access were used, then all the things that LCRA did would fall to the wayside. There's a catch basin behind Blair's house, there's the stone walls behind my house, and there's the dirt thing that they'd made for the water to follow. And if that were ever to get used for a driveway, whoever would build on that property would have to know that if there was a flood, they were going to be responsible for what they changed from LCRA to make us flood again.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Pierce, I'm Sue's husband, 1302 Paragon. Thank you for inviting us to this hearing. I'll try to be brief. I'm sure everybody will appreciate that. We live in a quiet little dead-end neighborhood. About the only sounds we hear are people cussing on the golf course and trucks that are gunning their engines to go up the loop. There's plenty of trees right next to our house, a lot of wildlife, very little traffic other than the people that live in our neighborhood, our dead-end street. My concern is what's going to change with all of that. We're going to have flooding and runoff from the high ground that they're going to work on with trees being moved, dirt being graded. We're going to have a lot of traffic noise. We're going to have crime activity in those new residences, or even when they're being built and you have transient workers spending months there and looking down on our houses and seeing our susceptibility. That has happened in the past with building in our neighborhood. As a result of those kind of changes, are we going to suffer a property value depreciation? Am I going to lose a lot of money on my house if I have to move away? I'm retired, I have limited income. I can't absorb a lot of loss at this point. That's a very deep concern for me. Where will the people in this room that are going to approve this be when I suffer those losses? Are you going to be here to answer for it and help me with that? I don't know. I don't know how long you guys serve, how long you're going to stay in Kerrville. Who do I go to with my problems at that point after it's all been done? Who will be held accountable for the loss we suffer as a result? We can't go back and undo what happens with this building after it's been done and people have moved in. Would the people on this board like this happening in their neighborhood if they had a similar situation, you know, trees, animals, quietness, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of a development that's got, I don't know, hundreds of people maybe there coming and going every day? Those are some of the things I wanted to put in front of you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name's Doug Evans. My brother and I own a house at 1706 Quinlan Creek. Our 91-year-old mom lives there. And she told us to come here and represent her. So you do what your mom says, you know. So anyway, I've been in the real estate business for about 38 years and feel like the value of the properties will diminish. It will go down. Be harder for somebody to, have a comfort zone in buying in that neighborhood. They're mostly retirees right now in that neighborhood, is what we've seen. And we feel like that's why they bought. So if something comes in like proposed, it's just going to hurt the neighborhood. So I vote no, or we do. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to speak in the public hearing? Not at 4:51. Close the public hearing. Commissioners, any thoughts or questions for Drew?
Drew, could you explain a little bit so the folks here understand that, this is just this particular stage is just changing the zoning, but then when it becomes an idea and a plan, the extent that goes through, so as far as planning for water drainage and whatnot,
Absolutely.
some of the issues they raised.
Ms. Byron mentioned this is just the zoning, just the land use to allow them to look at doing apartments or condos, along with the other listed uses that are on that list for R3. If this is approved, then they would go through what's called platting, developing that subdivision, any public water, sewer, drainage improvements as required. From there, it would move on into building permits, where a more detailed look at the impact of the drainage based on that building design, the site work, and all those requirements would be addressed at those times. So it is phased throughout the project as it goes through fruition. But this is just a land use hearing to allow them to move forward with those projects should it get approved.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments?
Are there any height restrictions?
There are height restrictions. I don't remember the maximum height off the top of my head, but as those buildings get taller in height, they're required to set back further from the residential property line. Go back to the zoning map just a second. So where any of the areas where the property line is adjacent to R1, as that increases above 2 stories, there's an additional setback. Above 3 stories and up to 45 feet. Off the top of my head, the setback's 50 feet at that point. As Mr. Bates showed, there is a 80-foot easement for LCRA to start with. So it'd be at least 80 feet away from that. I don't know if there's any additional setback requirement from LCRA for those structures. But there would be a significant setback from the property line.
What about from the golf course or from Loop 534?
I believe it's 25-foot setback from the property line, both front and rear.
Not much.
Correct.
Okay.
We have a rendering here. How many total units are you presenting here?
We felt that 4 was appropriate at this time due to the setbacks.
4 structures.
4 structures.
With how many
Oh, how many units?
housing units per
2
structure?
units per floor at 4 structures with
Michael.
5 stories.
Go ahead and come to the podium. All right, microphone will pick you up better here. Say one.
Oh, I didn't realize there's a microphone. I'm sorry. Yes, so we've got 4 separate buildings with an apartment on each side of each floor, so 2 apartments per floor, and 5 stories was our initial proposal, or that's what my grandfather was believing would be appropriate because of the height restrictions. And every time a floor would go up from the power line easement, we would have to keep scooting our buildings that way, and at some point we would have to get rid of a whole building So we would be limited to a certain height of, we felt, 5 stories until we crunch the numbers more particularly and get the all the code details refined. So the units would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 5, 30 units, we believe.
Parking underneath?
On the right side of that screen, is that a
Oh,
north-
that's the north compass, yes. Yes.
Parking underneath?
Parking underneath was his initial idea. The road entering would be on the high side, and the buildings would be offset slightly lower, but we would probably have to raise the buildings a little bit more just so we could accommodate without too steep of a grade into the underground garage for each building. And I believe that with the apartments, we require 2 full-size parking per unit, and that also, with our limited space on the property and the width, would not allow us to build indefinitely high because we wouldn't have enough parking. And we're trying to keep it on the low end of the property, closer to the golf course.
Well, with 5 floors, 2 units per floor, we're looking at 40 units.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Are they apartments or condos?
We have not decided yet at that point.
Okay.
Just a note, my grandfather does plan on living in these as well. He's moving down from Colorado because the winters are too extreme. And he also was thinking that maybe one of the buildings would be an assisted living, since that falls under the land use. And for himself as well as anybody else, since he knows that Kerrville is a more elderly community, and he feels that would make sense.
Okay. I'll be honest, this is tough. The site is a tough, no matter what is going to be developed there.
Yes, sir.
Personally, as a resident and citizen of Kerrville and a golfer, this is not something I would want to see just in general. You'd be able to see it driving down Sidney Baker. You know, the views that we have in our Gateway District to the hillsides and beyond are pretty spectacular. Something this large doesn't hide in amongst the hillside. It stands out.
Yes, from that view it does.
Yeah, that's concerning to me. Now, there are some product types in townhomes and garden homes that I could see might be appropriate. You go a little bit further upstream on Quinlan, over behind the YO Hotel, there's some townhomes and some condos that, you know, look pretty nice, and they fit in and they don't stand out as a detraction. You know, I could see something like that fitting in well on this property. They're spaced out enough that you're able to step those units between grades and not have so much site work and so much retaining walls. Yeah, to me, this feels like trying to put 5 pounds of flour in a 3-pound sack. There's too much trying to go on in this little piece of property with these types of challenges. Now, I will say that I don't know that an R1 designation necessarily makes sense either. I mean, it'd be great for the neighborhood, less development. But, you know, retirees are looking for smaller places and more economical places to retire to as well. That's why I think maybe a smaller townhome unit, but something with a much smaller footprint and not near as many units, to me would be more appropriate. I don't know. What do y'all think? Am I off base?
I know, I feel the same way.
Pretty big change.
Yeah, 2-story townhomes, I think, are super appropriate for our environment. I mean, this looks like something you'd see in San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really even have any apartment complexes in Kerrville that are that tall, other than the 4-story unit behind the end of the hills.
Right, over on Guadalupe Street. And
I mean, I like the idea. You're maximizing the view of the golf course and trying to utilize the property the best you can, but I'm not crazy about the high-rise apartment.
Drew, I have a question. With an R2 zoning that allows townhomes and garden homes, does R2 also allow apartments?
No, R2 does not allow multifamily. So it allows single family, duplex, townhome, garden homes. So duplex would really be your highest density.
Mhm.
You have 2 units per lot. Minimum lot size would be 6,000 square feet. Townhome would actually be pretty similar because you're 3,000 square feet per lot for the townhome.
Mhm.
But that would be individual lots for each unit at that point.
Right.
You have a height on townhomes? Height limit?
Off the top of my head, I think it's 35 feet for residential.
That's what I remember as well. I mean, so like I said, I think there is probably an argument for some type of zoning change from R1. I'm not ready to jump to R3 personally for apartments, especially with not completely unrestricted, but the heights are allowed. The heights that are allowed within that zoning classification, to me, start to get too obtrusive. Not just for the neighborhood close by, but just views from the Gateway District coming into Kerrville in general.
Kind of following y'all's discussion, the commission does have the authority to move to a more restrictive district during the public hearing. So since we've advertised R3, the proposal is R3, the planning commission could approve R2 or R1A. Be a slight increase in density from R1. But because they are more restrictive districts, you can make that recommendation as well. Not to muddy the waters anymore.
Well, you know, and
That doesn't fit with his proposal, though.
Well, yeah, I don't think.
I don't know that
falls
I'd be
with
ready
plans.
to make that leap without seeing some investigation into a design or a program
Right, and
that would fit that.
obviously the applicant does not have that in front of you as a proposal, so.
You know, yeah, I don't, and I'm, you know, I'll speak for myself. Maybe the commissioners might back me up, but you know, I don't want to say absolutely heck no, we're not going to move off of R1. I do feel like we would have some flexibility for the right type of product that I think would fit there. It's going to be a challenge. I know that, you know, trying to achieve that density on that small of a lot is pretty tough to make it work financially, but that just doesn't make sense to me to try and force something into a spot that really isn't meant to be there. Commissioners.
I'm in agreement. I'm along the same lines there.
Okay.
Somebody make a motion?
Yeah, we have a motion.
I'll make a motion that we reject the proposal.
I have a motion to deny.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. All right. Item 2B, public hearing and consideration and action on a planned development.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, that item is over with. Thank you.
This is public hearing, consideration, and action. Item to recommend an ordinance to amend the concept plan for a planned development district 03-26 on lots 1, 2, and 3 of Block 1 Martin Edition, generally located at 3001 through 3019 Memorial Boulevard. Look for your son.
No,
Pass it over to the applicant, let him introduce the case. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, we own that property.
Could you state your name for the record, please?
I'm Rick Martin. My son is Zach Martin. He's a cop in town. So be nice. We have I know some people. We have a little landscape company, and I'd like to put a building on the property that I can store stuff on. It's not really open to the public, but I like a place I can store some organic
fertilizers and pesticides and stuff like that that's out of the weather, that mice don't get in and stuff like that, and a place that if I go sharpen tools and work on stuff I can do indoors, it's just a metal building on the back side of the property. I don't know if you can see where it is on the back. I don't know if I can do a little pointer.
See if I can get this to work.
Yeah, you can see Highway 27 is to the right. I live just to the south side of that is where I live. And so it's access. So it's just a simple metal building, be well landscaped, it'll look nice. So if you have any questions, that's fine.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Martin? Okay.
You-
Thank you.
What, you
Oh,
live
yeah.
on this track?
I live, no, sir, we own, no, my house is, you see the power easement? I live right behind that, and my house fronts Riverside Drive.
Okay.
It backs up to this property.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
The property and the surrounding area are designated as community commercial. Community commercial development is characterized as small freestanding buildings containing one or more service sector businesses. Unlike larger centers that would attract customers from throughout the region, the community commercial place type provides for services for area of the neighborhood and to the lesser extent to the city. Goods are often smaller and services are experience-oriented. Business types may include restaurants, local retail, small offices, banks, venues, and other retail and service uses. The Kerrville 2050 plan also encourages the reinvestment into existing properties within the city limits. Existing land use and the PDD, the Planned Development District, are both consistent with the Kerrville 2050 plan. As I stated, this is just an amendment to the site plan or the concept plan. The original concept plan, I know commissioners, you can't see this, but had two buildings proposed on the larger lots of that L-shaped property, of those three lots. The first lot to the west is now almost completely encumbered by a utility easement. There are some city utilities that actually loop through that property. So the easement is all but 10 feet around. The second lot, there was a proposed building, again, back in 2003. They had a partnership with another builder that was gonna build their office and warehouse here. At this time, they are continuing to operate the landscape business, which is allowed under that planned development district, and are wanting to just put in a small, shop for the business.
So there was a building allowed in the planned development district? And this
Yes.
is just a different location?
That's correct.
Does that have to do with the 3 additional parking spaces you?
Yes, yeah, based on the square footage of this and the use, they would have to provide, or at least show that they already do provide those parking spaces.
How many square feet is the building?
1,200.
30 by 40.
Yes, sir.
All right.
So this being an amendment to the planned development district, it would be tied to this new concept plan.
Okay.
Be pleased to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
All right. At 5:08, we will open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak, please step forward.
I didn't fill out a card.
That's okay. Just state your name and address.
And I live, I guess, next door to where he wants to build his.
The White House?
Yeah, it's, by the plumbing,
Oh, you're across the street.
across the street.
Okay.
So it's not the same thing, right? 'Cause never been here, so.
That's okay.
And I got sent a letter, so, explain to me what they wanna do to that lot next door, is that?
Okay. What is your address?
3006 Memorial.
Okay. So you're right here across the street, across
Oh.
Memorial Drive.
Across Memorial Drive.
The landscape business directly across Memorial from you. They're wanting to put a new building, back in this corner.
Oh, okay,
So that'll be, your property's about here.
right,
They're putting a building back here,
across the street.
across Memorial from you. You're within 200 feet, so we're required to send notice to any property owner within
Okay.
200 feet.
That's all my questions. I've never been to this. This is
Okay.
interesting.
That's
Thank
good.
you. I think that's it.
Thank you for asking.
Uh-huh.
All right. Anybody else wanting to speak? All right, at 5:10, we'll close the public hearing. So property lines don't change, use doesn't change, just the development plan changes.
That's correct.
No, that seems pretty simple. I wouldn't want Mr. Martin sharpening his tools without being inside anyway. We have a motion on the
I'll make a
development
motion.
change.
I'll make a motion to approve the development change as presented.
Have a motion?
I'll second.
Have a motion in the second? Okay, motion in the second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. All right. Item 2C, public hearing and consideration on zoning change for Planned Development District.
This is Plan Development District 0908, and the applicant is requesting C3, General Commercial District, on approximately 3.06 acres of land out of the Samuel Wallace Survey, number 112, abstract A0360, generally located at 3105, 3115, 3125, and 3135 Memorial Boulevard. This is just down the street of Memorial. This is actually at the corner of Memorial and Loop 534. With that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Brinkman.
Name is Harvey Brinkman, 821 Earl Garrett. We have been involved as a partnership, A&D Properties number 2, which I represent, and also am the managing partner. We've owned this property since '98. Not the whole piece, but the corner, then going the other way. And I'm not sure if we did this in '08 or '09. We put it into a PDD, and in the PDD, we didn't do what we were using the property for, which is residential. We have apartments, and we have a duplex, and we have different rentals on the property. When we bought it, we had about 40 units that we were leasing for a time, and eventually we tore down what was known as the Parkway Apartments on the corner. The use, we don't have a buyer. We are trying to sell the property. We have not had an offer, and we are also trying to sell the interior part of the property, which represents the residential property. And so with that being said, we're just trying to clean it up. And last year, I believe it was October of last year, that the zonings were changed by the city and throughout the city. And the use that we're requesting, the C3, fits us better at this point. So we're just trying to line ourselves up. The PD, I know, works. I'm not excited about having one, but that's the way we went when we did it. So we'd just like to be in line with what the city's been doing.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any questions?
All right.
Property, again, just like the one down the street, is designated as community commercial. Business types including restaurants, local retail, small offices, banks, venues, other retail and service uses. The Kerrville 2050 plan encourages reinvestment of existing properties and infill properties within the city limits. The request for C3 at this intersection of two primary arterials is consistent with the policies of the Kerrville 2050 plan. The current zoning is PD. To the north, across Memorial, is C3. Is R1 to the south, C2 to the east and west, as you can see on the zoning map that you have in your printed PowerPoint there. With the existing access on the frontage of two primary arterials, there should be little impact on the thoroughfare system. parking and traffic impact would be dependent upon what those properties are developed as. You also have before you in your backup material, land use table comparing C3 and the original uses from the PD. While C3 does expand the list quite a bit, keep in mind the older zoning code used the land use as more of a category. So it actually probably would expand to more of these uses than just the ones listed in the original PD ordinance. But it does pick up, C3 does pick up the multifamily as exist on the property. And all of the uses that were specifically listed in the PD are also allowed in C3. And with that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
So did the PD allow residential or did not allow
It
residential?
did not allow residential.
And C3 will not allow residential,
C3 does allow multifamily,
multifamily?
yes,
Okay.
but not single family, duplex, or anything low density, but it does allow for the multifamily.
All right. Okay. At 5:16, we will open a public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak, please step forward, state your name and address.
Yes, sir. My name's Robert, go ahead, no, very well. My name's Robert Gonzalez. My family owns a property right behind that, 3100, I think 3110 Riverside Drive. I personally live at 3320 Riverside Drive, which is right behind that, that Stripes, I think it was Town and Country or Stripes. My property, the one I live on, 3320, we actually butt all the way up against my back fences. One of the concerns that I have is basically, I'd like to make sure that whatever gets put in that commercial zoned area, because obviously it'll be commercial zone, and my speculation is that as soon as it does go from its current status to the next C3 or commercial status, that corner lot that you own, which, you know, I'm familiar with it, will probably flip pretty quick. Because it looks like it's a prime place. I mean, it looks like it's a prime area for a developer to come in, especially if you're going to move the whole block down for the most part to make a shopping strip. My brother, my father, and I, we kind of agreed that a shopping strip would probably end up there. I just want to make sure it's not going to impact the neighborhood behind that, Riverside Drive, and then going down to the river itself. Again, I live on 3320. I get a lot of trash in my backyard. The Stripes is cars parked back there all the time. I get cigarette butts, I get Coke bottles. There is a chain link fence, but it's, you know, it only does so much. Other concerns that I have with the commercial, it being a commercialized property is, excuse me, the types of establishments that may be constructed there. I know a lot of other communities are building these certain marquees that are sky-rise marquees. I want to make sure that any restaurant, what have you, that goes in there has a marquee that's probably no higher than 6 feet, 8 feet maybe. So it still stays low. Just like earlier, people like the scenic hillsides and whatever else. And at night, when I'm sitting out there in my backyard, I don't want to see the skylight of a big golden arch over the hill, you know. The other things that kind of concerned us quite a bit was the types of establishments. And I hate to say it like this, I don't want to sound like I'm inhumane or anything, but I certainly don't want any kind of shelter of any sort to be built back there. You know, it's not exactly the best neighborhood in town, but it's not the worst neighborhood in town, and I don't want to make it any worse than what it is. In fact, I would love to be able to make it a lot better with people coming in with their great ideals and making all kinds of different things. I see that, like, part of 3320 or 33, the east, I guess, side of Riverside Drive is really developing quite nicely. I mean, there's a lot of different things happening along the river's edge, and I want to definitely see that. I just don't want it to impact the neighborhood negatively. I don't want it to be more commercialized. If I wanted to live in the city, I'd go to San Antonio and live in the city. Or I would live closer to the city, like what they're doing over here by Walmart. Have the canes and all this other commercialized stuff there. I don't live over there. I live on the other side where it's a little more quiet, it's peaceful, it's on the river. I want to keep it quiet, I want to keep it peaceful, I want it on the river. Anything else? That's it, Bob?
The environment.
As matters related to the environment, there is a parcel of the diagram that goes all the way down to the river itself. Kind of concerns that we have there are obviously erosion. I'm sure y'all guys have that in consideration as well, and the river authority as well. I'm sure it, I don't know how much of it will be developed down that far down the river because it is pretty narrow space. But nevertheless, you know, my father was a game warden for all his life, 30-something years. And so, you know, he cares about most of the environment and wildlife. We do get a lot of deer out there. I mean, a lot of different kind of animals. I myself, I love the cardinals that come around about this time of year. So, again, my whole premise is I want to keep it a nice, peaceful area. I don't mind commercialization coming in. I want to restrict a lot of that commercialization from the bigger stuff to maybe more, if it's an office space or something, like a law office or something. I doubt there'd be a law office down there, but still, we don't need another gas station on the corner. I don't need a bar down over there. I don't need any kind of liquor stores in that area. There's a mini mart across the river. There's a mini mart across the road. There's the Stripes right next door. I don't want another gas station. I don't need another gas station. I've kind of, until I know what's going to be built there, I really don't want it to change at all. I like it where it's at. Apologize, but I don't. I know. I mean, I know you had it for quite some time.
Yes, sir.
And I know, you know, it's probably becoming somewhat of a burden trying to get rid of it for quite some time, but, you know, I just don't want big golden arches on my, you know, at night. Anything else? That's it.
Thank you.
My name's John Davis, and some of the property that Robert was talking about has been in my family for about 40 years. I don't even know that it does have an address. It's across the street from 3210 and 3150, and it goes from Riverside down to the river. Part of this property that we're talking about virtually bisects my property. I own those two lots on each side of that little 30-foot swath that goes from Riverside down to the river. What I'm concerned is on the property on the corner, as Robert said, if it's commercialized, there's going to be quite a bit of traffic, I imagine. And it said back here that they didn't think traffic should be any problem because of the two main arteries that it borders, but they don't talk about that back alley. I'm curious as to what will happen with that back alley that leads all the way from where it says 3135 down between 3150 and 3210 and down to through my property on the river. Nothing has ever happened to that property on the river. It's just raw like mine is right now. But I don't know where my property line is and their property line is. I'd like to clean mine up. There's a lot of property that's been cleaned up along the Riverside Drive part there, and I'd like to do that, but I don't particularly care to go clean some other guy's property, especially just this 30-foot swath that goes all the way down. So I'm pretty concerned about the traffic. If you put a convenience store or something there on the corner there, I would think that alleyway would have to be blocked, or you're going to have all kinds of traffic coming down on Riverside. Who knows what you're going to have coming down that alley, like Robert said. I haven't seen too much people that are camping out there. We used to have that kind of stuff years ago, but I haven't seen much of that lately. But I think that would just open that up to allow some of that. So I'm just concerned if we turn that into, the commercial. And as I understand it now, is it commercially zoned now?
Yes, it is. Yes, the planned district development does have, several commercial uses. Actually, they're all commercial uses, including fuel sales, convenience store, car wash, clothing store, general merchandise or department store, drugstore, fitness center, florist, laundromat, mailing or postal service, general and professional offices, photography studio, photography and camera supply store, and restaurant. Sporting goods store, toy, gift, hobby, and novelty shop are the existing uses on that property.
My two pieces of property, I believe, are C1. What is C1? Is it a vacant lot?
That's probably a taxing
When I
zoning. It's actually zoned to R1, which would be single family.
R1. Well, it says C1 in the appraisal district.
And that's their
That's theirs.
taxing zoning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's
we get all
not land use
kinds of
zoning.
different. Yours is X and mine is Y, and nobody knows the difference. I got you. But mine is now, you said my two are commercially zoned, is that correct? No,
R1, single family.
single family. But there's nothing I can build on that property, is that correct?
The
It's all
floodplain,
good.
it would be slim.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure where the floodplain comes in, but it's fairly close to the property line at Riverside Drive.
Okay. Well, I'm just concerned that the traffic that would be coming through that back alley. It'd be nice to own that little piece of property, and I've tried, but nobody ever called me back on it, so.
Okay,
Anyways,
all right,
thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you, neighbors.
Anybody else like to speak in the public hearing? No? At 5:27, we'll close the public hearing.
Drew, could you talk about screening requirements for commercial use for C3?
There would be a screening requirement adjacent to the R1 zone lots. They do own, and you can see it on both maps in your backup, they do own a small sliver of property that runs from the backside of Memorial Boulevard all the way down to the river. I don't know how wide that is, a little alleyway.
Like you said, about 30 feet wide, and it expands to about 50 foot on the river.
Riverside, okay.
30 foot on the river, and it's just a driveway going down.
So
And with the lady that owned it before we did, sold it to the gentleman, I believe, that owned that property on the corner, and he wanted some,
Gotcha.
river, access.
And so with it all zoned one zoning, they would legally be able to access Riverside Drive, although it'd be fairly narrow and have to be fenced on both sides. So I don't know that that necessarily would make sense.
When you say fence, is it just a chain link, or does it require, is it something solid?
6 foot solid
Okay.
wood
So that
fence.
would kind of be a
Or-
little bit
or
better than his
landscaping.
chain link behind his house. and
Right, no,
fence
it would
stripes.
be required a solid
Okay.
fence now with the new zoning.
Would that strip have to be zoned with the rest of the property the same?
It does not, but we would need to acquire meets and bounds that exclude that. Unless we have a separate legal description.
Now, the screening
By
requirement
place.
would that have to be carried all the way down to the river? I mean, technically, that you have R1 on either side all the way down to the river.
It would at least have to carry down within 25 feet of Riverside Drive. Then you get into the front setback issues with the fencing. and
Oh, okay,
visibility
gotcha.
Issues, but
Just down to within 25 feet of Riverside Drive.
that's correct.
Gotcha.
If they were to use it. If they were to not use it as part of the commercial development, then the fence could just go all the way across what would be the normal property line, and that would just be a separate piece of property.
And it's R1 on both sides of that strip, is that what I'm saying?
That is correct.
And And what is Riverside Drive? Riverside Drive is a city street,
It is a city street.
therefore, got almost a separate, definitionally, a separate piece of property there.
And this property does consist of multiple lots. This is not one platted lot as you're looking at it today. It's just the ownership and the existing PD creates that boundary.
I mean, I feel a commercial designation for that piece of property is appropriate, and I think that the screening requirements would be helpful. I agree, there's a little bit of a concern about that 30-foot easement. I don't know that it would be as much a traffic concern for vehicles as it would be foot traffic. And
It's a weird piece.
that's the tough part for me about this. But I mean that
then they're gonna start going to.
Still in a public hearing?
I'm just giving you options. Oh, I got you.
no, we'll close the public hearing.
Absolutely.
Drew, so how did the C2 align with the PD and land uses?
I did not look at that. I'd have to go back and look.
Okay, it's more restrictive. I was just curious if it lined up.
For sure does not include the multifamily, which is the existing use on the property. As far as the other uses listed in the PD, I'm not sure.
Well, it is good to get rid of a PD. That's always a good thing. So that's a good direction to go with that.
I was glad to see that the efforts from the Code Review Committee, Planning Commission, and Council have certainly been recognized, and what we've drafted is certainly functional to the development community, so that's good news.
I like the C3 for the majority of it. I'm hung up on that little path. I mean, it seems silly to have a little C3 section right through the middle of residential.
R1.
Giving us, yeah.
Now, can the lots that are closest to the highway, you said they're not really buildable because of the topography? Is that what I heard?
On the
riverside.
On the
Sorry,
riverside.
the riverside
of Riverside Drive.
of Riverside Drive.
Okay, not close to the highway. Then those are. Are there residences on those lots?
On the riverside of Riverside Drive, no, there are not. I think there's a couple of existing RV pads down there, but everything else is on the north side of Riverside Drive.
I guess I'm
It's
referring to
above the
the two lots that are closest to the loop, or the lot that is closest to the loop outside of that strip.
These two?
Yeah.
This one is probably almost all in floodplain.
Okay.
There's nothing on it right now. That little corner closest to the bridge.
3210.
I can't read it. So.
Yeah, the downhill part section of that.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I own.
3210 is vacant.
Right. And then the piece across Riverside Drive
Yeah,
is almost entirely in the floodplain.
Are you sure? 3210? Harvey?
I don't know where 3210 is.
Well,
Behind me there's a house that's owned by a man named Shackelford.
yeah, right. There's a house on 3210.
Corner of Riverside and the Loop.
Yes, sir.
And they've owned that property since we've been there.
Right.
Okay, so there is a house there. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think it's unoccupied right now. I think, I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
okay, but I mean, I just don't want to, your stuff's empty. The first lot right there in the corner is empty of what you tore down.
Yes, sir.
All right. And then right behind you, towards the river, there is a house on what is designated here as address 3210. And then right next to that is this alleyway, or whatever we're gonna call it, or whatever it's called. But it's not designated, you gentlemen seem to be concerned that it's a transitional alleyway. I don't think that's the case at all.
We even blocked it off.
Right.
Well, it's not blocked now.
Well, because somebody in the neighborhood removed things. We didn't, okay? Not us.
Well, I'm not saying that you did, I'm just saying it's not blocked.
Well, I'm just pointing
Maybe
out.
somebody that just wanted to get through there, which they probably could if this was
Okay.
on commercial, they could just
But
move it.
but I just wanna make that one thing clear. There's
Thank you.
a building on that, a residence on 3210.
Whatever it's zoned is not gonna change that fact
No,
anyways.
it's not.
It just from a zoning standpoint, it just doesn't make sense to have that strip
Right.
zone something different. Especially if there's a active residence on both sides of the strip. I mean, that's just.
It's not usable land anyway.
Now, this is, I mean, I think, everybody's concern is what could potentially happen with this strip down to Riverside Drive, and that's, we don't want to create any burdens into the neighborhood. We also don't want to hinder, proper development on the commercial side. And
Yeah, if that strip was R1 and the other property was C3, would that hurt that C3? Would that hurt the C3 property in any way?
That strip is currently part of the planned district development. So as it sits today, it is commercially zoned. So I don't know if that changes.
Well, right.
I asked Drew a second ago, Mr. Paxton, if I just withdraw, we stay where we are. You know,
Right.
I do have residential, but I'm also, I guess, grandfathered on residential because I've been there. All I was trying to do is clean something up. As far as that strip goes, I'm not gonna ask you to say that's R1. I'd prefer it stay like it is, or I'll just stay PD.
Yeah, PDs are fun.
Last and best.
This is something that has been done a long time ago. This wasn't just something that popped up. I'm not trying to create an issue for the neighbors. I think we've been a good neighbor, and we try to take care of things. So I had never, ever had a complaint from a neighbor.
So
Got
Drew,
a few I could complain
what-
about, but I haven't had.
what could actually be done with that strip? I mean, within the confines of a C3, you
The only
can't
thing
build
you could do-
anything.
No, you couldn't build anything. The setback requirements,
So if you change it R1, it doesn't do anything.
Right, other than just
yeah.
You
make
know,
everybody feel warm and
we actually
fuzzy.
own the road.
What's that?
We actually own our little piece of Riverside based on the survey. But we'll definitely give it to the city.
Yeah, I guess, this, in the conditional use, we couldn't put any kind of conditions on blocking that off.
Correct. Yeah, with it just a zone case, we cannot.
And
I think
conditionally
the
zone it.
problem was created when the PD was created, not now, so. That's
correct.
point
Well,
taken.
but I mean, like, could you even build a road there? I mean, would that even work in that 30-foot?
You could put an access point there, yes, because it would be consistent. The zoning would be consistent on both properties. So they could use that
I'm just
as
trying
an
to think
access.
why anybody would think that was a neat, necessary access point, other than, I think probably originally it was like, well, if you build some apartments there, they could walk down to the river, is probably what the original plan was.
Right.
She sold that to the fellow that owned that courts back in the 50s.
I can understand with that, but I mean, in reality, if you were putting a, Dollar General or whatever on that corner, there wouldn't be any reason or necessary reason to put an access point down that road.
Right.
Or create a road there, because you've got access from two major arterial.
It would be too small to.
Right, it'd be an alley, like a little,
Yeah, it's wide enough for.
I mean, I guess in reality, that's probably never, ever gonna be anything. It's weird.
Yeah.
And I would take Mr. Brinkman's word on it, they weren't gonna do anything with that, but, when they sell that property, we're opening up a little bit there.
Well, and when it goes to development, that's, I guess we can't really put any restrictions on it.
No.
C3 makes sense though on that, the rest of that property.
Let's do C3.
All right, any other questions, commissioners, for Drew, or do I have a motion?
Let me ask you one quick question, if I may. Right now, what are the screening parameters from a commercial to a, you'd indicated whether it be a chain link or whether it be a wooden fence, there's a possibility of raising it up to more of a more solid structure beyond a wooden fence. Wooden fences rot, they're not maintained. It just.
That's a question for Drew, he can answer that for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the C3 zoning does require a 6-foot solid fence. Wood being the minimum, they could do a combination of chain link and landscaping so that it's still a solid visual and physical barrier. They could do anything above and beyond that, height or material wise.
What's the height on that?
6-foot minimum.
Okay.
Again, someone could build a taller fence that is still allowed. The only issue we'd run into again is if you approach Riverside Drive, there would have to meet the 25-foot setback, so there's not a visibility issue. And then same thing, running east and west on that back property line, as anything's developed, it would require that screening fence. And it would be required to be maintained and kept up. I mean, if it starts rotting or falling apart, they have to maintain it as well.
What about any other, like, on-street marquees? I mean, is there any limitations to or restrictions to?
You're referring to the freestanding signs?
Yes, the signs that may be out, that.
Yes, there's a sign.
Pylon signs or.
Right. There would be allowed signs based on the sign code. That's gonna be dependent upon each lot and how it develops. Generally speaking, the freestanding signs are allowed 30 to 35 feet if the property is large enough, based on that frontage. So that's, again, gonna depend on the development.
That's, if this property was sold, platted into one property, it would be large enough probably for something of that size.
That's right.
But not as they are individually.
Does it really make it difficult of not knowing what would be there or what could be there, or the potential is being there? To make it, to be able to say, well, no.
Well, but as the PDD, you could have some of those same things, so that doesn't really solve that concern.
Did you have another comment, Mr. Brinkman?
If I may, Mr. Gonzalez, there's a guy came in and bought one of the lots, on Riverside, and they put up a fence, a metal fence. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that is. That thing's gotta be 8 foot tall. Yeah. Minimum. Yeah. On a residential lot. And I didn't know that was even legal, but it was they put concrete down, they put up pipe, they put up, is it one of your all's lots? No. Okay. And I don't know who it was. And they hadn't put anything on it yet other than a travel trailer or something like that, or.
I think it's not there. It's a storage thing, but it's not there.
Yeah, but that fence to me is not the site. It's not a beautiful fence. It's kind of dead. It hurts the neighborhood a little bit to me. But they came and encroached on my property when they built it. Did I go over and do anything? No. They came and had to use it. It sounds to me like with this 30-foot strip or whatever, how wide that thing is, it may be 15 foot.
It's 30 across my property. It's smaller.
Yeah.
For that driveway.
I think I'll withdraw the request and just stay a PD. Maybe I'll come back later and ask for an amendment to the PD to get residential back on it.
Do you want to wait till we vote?
Good point. Good point.
Well, I guess the first question is, do we agree that C3 is appropriate for the upper part? And I think
Definitely.
we do.
Definitely.
So, and the problem is already there now, so I don't know that
true.
I don't know that we're making it any worse, that strip.
I guess we were just really trying, we saw a problem, or an issue, not necessarily a problem, we saw an issue that it would be helpful if we could correct it.
Right.
And we're just trying to explore ways to address that and see if there's a way to correct it. You know, at this point, it doesn't seem like it. But the way it is now, it stays uncorrected anyway. You know, if it was sold, redeveloped into one piece of property, that would have to go through the city on would it have to have a development site plan submitted? No.
No, the zoning code does not require development site plan any longer.
Okay.
So it would just go through the plating process, which is just that subdivision piece for the legal description, surveying efforts, and then through the building permit process.
You would see it as a plat.
Okay. All right. Commissioners, do I have a motion on a change for the zoning?
I make a motion that we approve the changes presented.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and to a second to change to C3 zoning. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 1. 6, 4, 1 against. Is that correct? Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item. Item 2D, public hearing and consideration on action on an ordinance to change from R1 zoning.
Change from R1 to RT, the residential transitional district on approximately 3.97 acres out of the Walter Fosgate survey number 120, abstract 138, generally located at 1104 Lois. This is at the corner of Lois and Harper at northwest corner. With that, I'll turn it over to the applicant.
My name's Guy Seifert, and my wife and I own the property. We currently are R1, as y'all know, and we have neighbors of R1 on two sides, one being an assisted living. And across Lois Street, we have R2 and commercial, and then we have R3 across Harper Road from us. We are proposing to transition the house, the current house, into a professional office building. And we have been approached by a real estate company to move in there, and that's what has triggered this scenario. And so our proposal, again, is to transition the house into a professional office building. The remaining portion of the property, which would be ultimately about 2 acres that would wrap around that house under a replat scenario. We would eventually at some point look at possibly putting more single family on that portion of it. We may look at some duplex, we may look at some single family, single story multifamily units in there as well. But right now, the first phase of this would just be to transition into the RT on the whole property and have the professional office building. That would be the first step. So that's our proposal.
All right. Okay.
Property in the surrounding area are designated as neighborhood residential within the future land use plan. The neighborhood residential for R1, R1A, RT would all be consistent. Neighborhood residential does include in the description limited amounts of local retail and services appropriate in certain locations as needed to support primary land use being the single family neighborhood back behind it. The intersection of a collector and principal arterial, you can imagine the traffic counts are pretty high for this. New development would be not typical for a single family home. That is a large lot, 3.9 acres. They're looking at converting the existing home to a professional office. Kerrville 2050 plan encourages the reinvestment into existing properties and infill properties within the city limits. The request for residential transitional zoning in this location at the intersection of the collector and arterial is appropriate and consistent with the Kerrville 2050 plan. With the access to both a collector and arterial, there should be limited impact on the thoroughfare system, and traffic would be looked at and measured based on any future development. With it just being a professional office building, there would be limited additional traffic. Based on the policies contained within the Kerrville 2050 plan, staff recommends approval for the request. I'd be pleased to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
All right, thank you, Drew. So at 5:50, open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak, please step to the podium, state your name and address. Seeing no one come forward, we close the public hearing at 5:51. I have a question, Drew. Is it correct that in residential transitional, parking is required to be in the back of the structure?
That's correct.
Which side is the back of the structure?
That would be, it's a good question. Let's see, I don't think I have anything closer picture. It's currently addressed off of Lois. I think we would just start with that, just for primary access point. However, there is an existing driveway that circles in front of the house along Lois. They would not be required to remove that. They could use that existing parking. Any expansion or additional parking would have to be behind the front of the structure. So they would be allowed to use that existing drive and parking there.
Okay.
Because it's existing.
Because it's existing, that's correct. And the RT district, as you guys are aware, is intended to expand beyond a residential use, but still remain a residential look. So in the instance where you do have a smaller lot, smaller home with multiple parking spaces, rather than the entire front yard become parking, parking is required to be behind the house so that from the street, you still get that residential feel. This being such a large lot, that existing drive, it wouldn't change the look of that at this time. If they were to do any expansion or additional lots, additional units, that would have to comply with that requirement at that point.
Okay. I mean, I think, personally, I think the RT is appropriate for this lot and its location. And, you know, it's almost a shame that in this particular instance, I don't know that having a few parking spaces up front would really hurt anything. But that's not allowed in a transitional, and I don't want to open that door.
Right. Again, the purpose of that residential transition district is from a neighborhood transitioning to more of a commercial area. So from strictly just from a mapping standpoint, this is a prime location for that district. As we see it transitioning from downtown along Earl Garrett and Clay Street, we've looked at those RT districts quite a bit, kind of providing that buffer and transition area before you hit the neighborhoods behind there.
And even, you know, and again, even if this lot is subdivided, maintaining that RT designation still makes sense to me.
I'm just glad to know what the plan was. I was confused. Why would somebody get rid of that pretty house?
Okay. Well, I'll make a motion. We accept it.
Motion to approve as presented. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. All right. And item 2E, public hearing and consideration on a planned development district.
This is another case to remove a planned development district going from planned development district 0604 to R2 Medium Density Residential District on approximately 7.629 acres of land out of the Samuel Wallace Survey, number 112, abstract 360, generally located east of Meeker Road and south of Poplar Street. With that, I'll turn it over to the applicant.
All right.
Case.
Good evening, Commissioners, staff. Thank you for the opportunity to consider our request to rezone our tract of land. As you are aware, the
Could you please
PD
state your name for
I'm
the
sorry.
record?
I'm Joe Byers. I'm the managing partner of 2J Page Development LLC. As you know, the current zoning allows for a higher density than what we're wanting to develop the property. We're wanting to develop the property that's shown on that tract of land. I think there's a slide. This shows. Just I want to get to the plan. Okay, as you can see right there, the way we have tentatively laid out a proposed project for approximately 23 houses on the 7 acres. We want to be able to preserve the integrity of the property. It's a beautiful 7-acre tract of land, heavily treed, and as you see the way we have it laid out, we're a medium density home builder, and we're wanting to be consistent with the adjacent property uses, and so the reason for the request is the current zoning of PDD is a high density, one would be medium density, and develop lots that are 50 feet by approximately 150 foot in depth. And so we think it's very conducive to adjacent property uses, and we're going to be building brand new homes, workforce housing as it's called, between 1,200 and 1,600 square feet. And so that's the reason for the request. Any questions?
Commissioners? All right, thank you.
Okay.
The property and the surrounding area are designated as transitional residential within the future land use plan, which does support a variety of housing types as we've discussed. The current zoning is PD. This is for a multifamily project that obviously was never carried out. They're looking to go to R2 for single family development using those smaller lots that are allowed in the R2. As you can see on the zoning map, the surrounding neighborhood is zoned R2. So the zoning is consistent with the adjacent areas. And for a residential project within an existing neighborhood, there should be no impact on the thoroughfare plan. With the addition of any new homes in a subdivision, there will be additional traffic, but nothing that wouldn't have been anticipated, and certainly less than a multifamily project would have produced had it been built. Each lot will be developed with adequate parking as per the zoning code. And based on the consistency with the Kerrville 2050 plan, staff recommends a case for your approval. Get back to that plat. As you can see on the proposed plat there are actually a couple of existing lots that are part of this development. So they started working with city engineering and public works and of course planning to look at building on some of those existing lots, and this will be a continuation of that project following the zoning. And with that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
Any questions so far? No? Okay. 5:59, open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak, please step forward, state your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Terry Kincaid. I live at 2920D Hunt Street. Been living there for 28 years. One of my main concerns, I don't mind them developing there, is where are they going to take all the water? In 2002, we got inundated with a tropical storm that sat here and rotated for days. One time, I had 8 inches of water in my house. because there's an arroyo at the end of this property. And all the upper areas of it all drains through there. Sometimes the arroyo, it's roaring. So it drops into an easement that comes through from the city. I also end up with a lot of drainage from all the streets around, because my property might be a little bit low. My main concern is, how are they gonna keep all that water confined so it doesn't flood the homes in this lower part of the property on Hunt Street? I mean, it's a beautiful piece of property, I agree.
Mm.
You know, I well, I actually feed the deer and stuff, you know, because it's that 18-acre stretch there, they're developing the 7.62 or whatever it is. I just don't want, I actually really wouldn't want the thing built there at all. It seems to me like they're crowding a whole bunch of houses into a little bitty area. And main thing is, what are they gonna do with the water? Because you're adding more concrete, more driveways, and that's all on the side of a hill. All of it. That's one of my main concerns.
Okay.
Okay?
We'll talk with Drew about that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else like to speak?
Yeah, I'm gonna speak for my mother. She lives at 403 Beach Street.
Sorry, introduce yourself for the record.
I'm Sheila Sloan.
Okay.
Her house is at the end of Beach Street. The road stops right in front of her house. There is no road going up that side where they've cleared that land off in front of her house. And there's a creek bed that runs down at the other end, runs right down. So where's the road going?
Show you on here since I can't show it up there. Of course, there's 403,
Yeah.
mother's house, and the
We
rest
own
of your
all
property
of
back
this,
here.
right?
The road will continue straight. It actually turns to the west.
All right, where's the creek? Oh, it's down
Creek
here.
is down here, right.
Okay, so
it'd be,
there's houses all the way up here,
there's 2 vacant lots across from your mom's house.
okay, and
Then there'll be the new street, and it actually comes back to Poplar. That street is currently platted. It was just never built. Pull that back up here on the screen so everyone can see it up here.
yeah, because they're saying too that road, whoever is gonna put that road in there?
The developer's building it.
Okay, because it's right in front of my mom's house. I mean, it's just right in the front yard.
And so your house is here.
Mm-hmm.
Beach Street will continue down, and then those 2 vacant lots across the street from you are right here.
Is
And then
that,
road
is
will
that where they
continue.
cleared the land off?
I haven't been out there, I don't know what you.
Is that the land that y'all cleared off?
The right of way that's already been platted and approved has been cleared. So that's the right of way that I think you're talking
No,
about.
there is no right of way.
There-
It's just where you cleared the land and you come across
Yes,
and
ma'am,
back
that's
up
the right of way.
around?
Yes, ma'am.
There actually is a
correct.
street there.
Okay,
It
and
was
how
just
many
never built.
houses are you gonna put in there?
Well, on the first, I'll show you right here. This was part of the purchase, so, these houses right here, these lots right here.
Okay,
It's like phase one
because
right
the
here.
way that the clear off, it clears off and it comes around.
Yes, so you're
And
talking
then
about right here, so
the
your mom's
creek
place is
runs right
here.
there, so I don't,
Okay, oh,
what are
yeah.
you gonna do about that?
Well, luckily we have our
And their
civil
land.
engineer here that can address all the water concerns and drainage concerns. So when the public's done, we'll like to have opportunity to address those questions.
Okay, my complaint, my worry is the road being right in my mother's front yard, which we thought that she owned that right there, just that little space, about 10 yards or 10 feet or something. And, so since they came up, we found out we don't own that. But what kind of traffic is that? My mother lives by herself. What kind of traffic is that gonna be? You know, what kind of people is gonna be moving in there? You know, all of this is going to affect my mother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you show us on a piece of paper? We
Sorry,
can't see that.
I know you
so
guys can't see that up there.
What she's referring to.
Mm-hmm.
So her house is right about here, at the end of Beach Street.
Mm-hmm.
They own all the way down to the, on the creek bottom there.
Okay.
There's 2 vacant lots across the street. Those 2 lots are already platted. and actually not part of this case, those are already zoned R2.
Show them where the road ends right now,
The road actually ends right about here, just short of those lines.
right in their front yard.
And the pavement actually curves into the front yard currently. The developer will build the rest of Beach Street. What's on the plat is A Street. What's currently on the plat is Short Street. Both will have to be renamed because we have other A and Short Street. Those two streets are already platted, dedicated streets. They'll just be building those streets, and these lots here.
So
The zone case
she'll,
itself.
she'll access from there.
Yeah, she'll still access from there. Her driveway
Right now, it'll go
starts right there.
straight, and then it'll come across here, and then go
The
back.
zone case today,
Right here,
So
yeah,
her house
this
is
is
right
right here,
there.
yeah, this is where her house is at.
Looks just like
Dies
that.
right here, and now they're gonna finish the road,
so the zone
and
case
then take it
today is
down and
on
come back
this
around.
vacant portion here,
So what does she think she owns?
going from that
Okay, so
PD
the-
for multifamily.
So the road that she's referring to is not within this zone change.
Is not within the
Yeah.
zone.
Yeah, but you,
Everybody has a street in front of their house.
yeah, that's true.
Commissioners, the road that we're referring to, that at the corner of Beach Street, where the road turns to the west, that is actually not part of this case. That's an existing road. It was just never built. So the developer will build that as part of their first phase, along with a street that runs parallel to Beach behind the existing houses.
Okay.
Doesn't exist
Right,
right now.
just one second.
We are still in a public hearing.
And he owned this.
Anybody else like to
No, they
speak
don't own any of this.
in the
They
public
just own-
hearing?
They gotta own, but they gotta do the street.
Right, so they can access these lots.
My name's Michael Stander, and I manage the property there at 405 Meeker, which is 2904 Hunt Street. And a couple of questions, not really against it, but I do have a couple of questions. You could go back to the plat, please?
Sorry, you have to stay over here so we can pick you up on
My finger's not that long.
that. Yes, sir.
So there is, when it rains, it really does come a waterfall down those hills. So what is this? Is this a lot for a house here? What is this, lot 5 you have proposed?
Yes, sir. We'll be able to answer the drainage question after public comment, so. But yeah, that is one lot that's gonna be utilized as a drain retention area, which our engineer can describe a lot better than I can.
Okay, so for my own education, what is PDD?
It's a planned development district.
I know, but I know what it stands for, but what does that mean?
Oh, that just, it was I don't know, Drew, you can explain a little bit better.
Current PDD is actually for a multifamily project, for an apartment project.
Okay. So anything PDD is multifamily?
No, PDD is kind of like customized zoning. So specific to a project, specific to a site plan, parking requirements, setbacks, I go through and specify all the details of that project for the zoning. In the case of this project, it was 4 or 5 different apartment buildings throughout those hills. Obviously required parking and setbacks all identified in that concept plan. But that was, again, from 2006. I don't know that the city ever saw any work done on that project after that.
Another question, this little road here, is that where the fire hydrant is?
It's pretty close there. The fire hydrant, I believe, is a little bit further to the right of where the cul-de-sac road is.
Okay.
And this is just preliminary, so we can have something to show the public. You know, we haven't requested a plating of the 7 acres just yet.
Okay. Because this is my property here, and we do get a lot of water. I mean, it's literally waterfalls. Big waterfalls.
Understand.
So are these lots here also part of it?
They're not platted yet, but those are future lots that we'll have, as part of the zoning request. The lots to the north that we own are not part of the zoning request, but those lots where you have the arrow will eventually, will request to be platted. But as you know,
below the numbers right there, it drops off pretty steeply, so we're gonna be building up closer to the road. And then that way the folks there have a beautiful view of the hill country.
Yeah, maybe somebody come in with some condos to build right there on the side of the hill.
No, we don't wanna do that. We're not condo developers.
All right, anybody else like to speak in the public hearing?
We'd like to have our engineer, describe the drainage, if that's okay.
Okay.
I have one other question. When you said workforce housing, what's that mean?
Well, the people that work at, you know, the Hampton Inn, you know, Waterburger, people that are in the workforce, that, you know, that nurses, fire, police officers, they're the workers in the community, and that's just a term that economic developers and cities use in order to provide affordable homes that are, you know, not $350,000 homes or $450,000 homes. These homes will blend in beautifully with what's already there, except they'll be brand new homes.
No more Habitat for Humanity.
No, we're not Habitat for Humanity. In fact, we're gonna be marketing our homes to young professionals. There's the VA hospital 5 minutes away. They're bringing in nurses. The state hospital is expanding. You guys know all this. You live here. And so those are the folks that we're going to be target marketing to be able to live here and work here instead of work here and live in San Antonio or Bernie or anywhere else. Comfort. So that's what we mean by affordable, because, you know, we're going to keep our prices, you know, within the financial means of people that are, you know, working in the hospitals and, you know, police, fire.
What's the square footage of the house?
We're averaging, it's gonna be between 1,200 to about 1,650 square feet.
What is the value of these homes?
We haven't quite got there yet, but it's gonna be very consistent to what's in the neighborhood now.
Okay, please step to the podium. We'll get to you just shortly.
And I'm Ann Oakley, and instead of bringing the streets where they building the homes, bring the street out into my area, why can't they take all the streets out and just have them coming all off of Meeker Street? Instead of bringing it, because that's a dead end down there. It stops,
Right.
okay?
Miss Overly, that street exists. It was just never built. So Beach Street continues in front of your house. At the end of that second lot, roughly where they've cleared, that street exists that goes to the west, and then another street that runs parallel to Beach back to Poplar. And then your house is here.
So there's no way that it can be arranged where instead of bringing it into somebody's yard, they can't bring the street out on an already built street, Meeker. They could bring that road out over there, and then they wouldn't, because they're gonna have to go down, and all that traffic is gonna come right out in my yard.
And this street will only have 4 or 5 lots fronting right here. There'll be another street that comes out to Poplar.
Yeah, well, that's down below me.
Right.
Right.
And then
It won't affect me there.
all of this back here will go on to Meeker. On the bottom side of the hill to
So
the
they're
west
just
of you.
gonna have one street coming out
Right.
onto Beach?
One connecting Beach and this street that connects to Poplar. It'll actually be a U all the way through. So it won't be a dead end anymore, basically.
Okay.
Okay.
So those streets are already, I mean, the pavement isn't in place, but the street has already been designated
That's
as
correct.
such.
Streets designated, the lots are platted, they were just never built.
Okay. All right. At 6:14, I'm gonna go ahead and close the public hearing. I would like to address some of these concerns about flooding. I assume you're the engineer for the project?
Sure.
Yeah.
James
Please state your
Wilson.
name.
Yeah, James Wilson with Malone Wheeler, civil engineering firm and development consultant. And it's pretty straightforward as far as the drainage is concerned. It's an obvious concern from when you just look at a topographic map. But all I can say is that we're going to adhere to all water codes, and we're going to be working with Kyle at engineering, and we're going to be releasing water at a less rate and at a less volume than what's existing. It's also gonna be falling into an existing drainage easement that's right here. Existing platted drainage easement that's right here. Additionally, we're gonna be able to control the water, which is gonna be helpful for the entire surrounding community versus right now it's kind of just meandering through. So we're gonna be able to identify the existing drainage and control it, detain it, and release it at less volume and less rate for anything along Meeker and additionally anything that's gonna be future beach and poplar.
Okay.
So we are, just so you know, we are not in the platting stages yet, so we haven't defined the drainage easements running through the property. That's why they're kind of just big lots. And secondly, we are days away from submitting our construction drawings to engineering too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Since we weren't able to see what you were
Sorry,
pointing to,
Forgot my-
where is the drainage easement?
The largest lot that's on the site,
5.
Okay,
it's gonna be on the back side of that.
so it's running along that
a natural-
southwest property line?
They talked about having drainage roughly back here on this lot
Mm-hmm.
for retention.
Retention.
Right here.
Coming back up. Bottom side of that lot for retention.
So you
And then there would be drainage easement
You're gonna
running.
improve the drainage situation.
Yeah, the ultimate goal is there's a obvious problem here, and this is gonna actually help improve from a detention standpoint. It's gonna alleviate a lot of the runoff running into those neighboring adjacent owners. And then speaking to the lady's concern here, public safety, you're gonna now have fire access that properly turns around the entire block, which is gonna be helpful instead of fire trucks having to stop at a dead end. But that's, again, a separate issue from this zoning case. We feel like we're gonna help alleviate a lot of the drainage problems and a lot of public safety concerns.
Okay.
Anything else, ladies and gentlemen?
Commissioners? Thank you,
All right,
sir.
thank you, guys.
All right. Commissioners, any other questions for Drew?
I've got one.
Yes.
So, do you know what the zoning was before 2006? It was probably R2.
I would bet it was RC.
Or was it the same as the surrounding neighborhood?
I think it was the same as the surrounding area. I don't know that for sure. The neighboring area was RC, which is why it was converted to R2 with the new zoning code. But previous to the PD, I'm not positive.
So as it sits right now, it allows for apartments.
That's correct.
And only apartments.
Correct.
Could you elaborate on restrictions on the retention areas?
So, in short, I mean, any drainage with the new development, you cannot drain onto adjacent properties with higher volume or higher velocity. How they go about engineering that to make sure that that happens, obviously they've got quite a bit of leeway to do that, but it won't be creating, again, more volume or more velocity. So whatever the rate the water flows off the property now, it should flow off the property after it's developed, which it takes into account rooftops, driveways, additional streets, all of that taken into account.
All right. Any other concerns or questions, commissioners? Do I hear a motion to approve or deny R2 zoning?
I'll move that we approve it.
Got a
PDD to R2.
motion to approve. Have a second?
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second to approve. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. All right, item 3 is staff reports.
The other thing I have right now is Code Review Committee will be meeting later this month to review the subdivision code. Reviewing that in a couple different pieces. As you can imagine, that's quite a lot to take in one meeting. So we're looking at the first section of the updated subdivision code with Code Review Committee. Mike, do you recall that date off the top of your head? I think so. I think next week. From there, again, once the code review committee gets through all the sections, that'll come before you guys. I do have, I think, 2 items scheduled for April 2nd for our regular scheduled meeting.
All right.
That's it.
With that, meeting adjourned at 6:19. Thank you.
Thank you.